Well, welcome to part one of my video build series for the Enterprise Refit. I've just recently completed the prep work for the bridge assembly, which I think is also called the A decks. If I'm not mistaken, the A deck and the AA deck. I just call it the bridge assembly, that's easier for me. So I'd like to quickly go through some of the steps that I've taken to get to this point, and then moving on from there, because I've had to think pretty seriously about the lighting, not only for the bridge assembly, but for the entire ship. I'd like to review the choices that I've made for the electronics, for the lighting of this ship. And I just had my shipment come in from an online distributor, and I'd like to go through those as well and explain the reasons why I've made some of the choices that I've made and what I plan to do with the electronics for this ship, which should be a lot of fun. And that's one of the main reasons I decided to embark on this project in the first place. So anyway, bridge assembly. First step, because I am lighting this, was to get the bridge assembly up a little bit, because there's simply, out of the box, there wasn't enough clearance to get lighting out of here. And even to scale, it was probably too low anyway. So raising this was definitely step one. And what I did is we had the original 3 legs inside of here, which are used to guide the mounting onto the bridge assembly. What I did is I cut a piece of sprue from the parts tree, a thick one. I flattened the edge out by sanding it down on some sandpaper, some pretty rough grit sandpaper, like 80 grit or something like that, just to flatten that edge. And as close as I could to this interior circle, I glued that down. And what that did is and then I shaved off any excess to make it exactly even with the original 3. Oh, I'm out of camera here. With the original 3, so that this thing sat perfectly now. And what that allowed me was to put equal pressure on the front and back and the sides of the bridge assembly and sand this down. And the reason I was doing that is I didn't want to cut individual pieces here. I wanted to glue one big piece along. So what I did is I took a piece of styrene and I wrapped it around the entire shape, the front and sides of the bridge assembly. I pinched it, squeezed it towards the aft end, and that gave me a form around the shape of the bridge assembly. And using that, I was then able to take another piece of shorter styrene, put some glue on the edge, and slip that in there inside that form. And the end result was beautiful. It gave me a perfect, once the form was off, and the ends were trimmed, it gave me a really nice shape where I was able to maintain the shape of that bridge assembly. Originally it was straight down, it was 90 degrees down. And in reviewing by the way, anybody who's doing this model, I highly recommend using that method. The end result was perfect. If I had decided to just leave it that way so that the new edge was straight down, it would have required very little filling. It just worked out really nice, rather than cutting the pieces individually and trying to mount them in there, because you don't get that curve. It's going to require filling if you do it that way. It's easier in my mind to create that form. It requires so little extra effort. Create that form, slip your piece up inside there, and then cut out the excess that you don't want afterwards. And that's what I did, and it worked out really well. Now, in reviewing the movies and taking some screenshots, I came to the conclusion that this edge should not be straight down. It's definitely at an angle, and in fact, I probably haven't angled it enough. There's quite a bit of an angle there. I'm happy with what I have. The way I achieved that is once I had that straight 90 degrees down all the way around, I took a much smaller piece of styrene, that's 2 mil. I have a piece of 1 mil around here somewhere. I thought I did. Let's find the package, so that'll help. Oh, that's my 2 mil again. There we go. So this is 03 by 04 in metric. That's 3/4 of a mil by 1 mil. And I glued that down so that it was against the surface of the table and then against the surface of that edge all the way around. And what that did is it gave me the room I needed to fill that in and create a bit of an angle there. And once that was done, honestly, I could have probably used another strip, glued that around as well, and filled that in even further. If I were to do it again, I probably would go that extra route just to give myself even more of an angle. But I'm happy with what I've got. That turned out pretty nice, I think. Because the fact is, in the studio model, if you're looking for any kind of degree of accuracy, it's not straight down. You do need to create a bit of an outward angle there. So I've managed to achieve that. I'm pretty happy with that. Along the way, I shaved off these details. And in the end, I wish I hadn't. I had an idea in my head. It was a stupid idea. And that was a mistake. 3 times around, I've had to pull these off again. Twice. So the first time around, I took the measurements before I sanded these off. I measured them before I did. I glued them. I cut new pieces out. I glued them back on. The styrene that I used was too thick, so I had to sand it down. It didn't want to hold to the curve that's here, so the edges kept pulling up. And you can see it's even doing it now. I'm still going to have to get in there maybe and fill that a little bit so that it creates a uniform shape against the edge of the bridge assembly there. But yeah, it's something I wish I hadn't done. Anyway, third time around, I did manage to replace these. I'm happier with how it turned out. I'm still not completely happy. I take some points away from my effort here. But those were tough to get these on. At least for me, they were. I'm not experienced enough maybe at it. I don't know. But for now, I'm just going to leave it the way it is. I probably do need to touch it up with some paint and just try to fill it in. And there's still some dark spots in there. But yeah, for now, I'm good with it. Also along the way, and this was just a matter of gaining some practice with painting out of a spray can. After my first couple of coats of primer and then my first couple of coats of color, I had filled in these grooves. I don't know what they are in technical terms. It could be just aesthetic, but I had filled these in with paint, and I had to get in there with my hobby knife and just gently start to score them out a little bit, score until I had enough to grab onto those, and then I started really applying some pressure, and I managed to dig all the paint out of there. It was quite a task. It took a few hours, but along the way, I learned how to use a spray can a little bit better. We'll see. I still haven't used my airbrush. We'll see what the results were like with an airbrush. I think with the airbrush, obviously, you have so much more control of the paint that comes out. You can apply much thinner layers. So I think the danger of filling in fine details is going to be a lot less. So we'll see, I guess, when I get there. These little vent things, I had to score these out as well. Here I am covering up my model with my thumb. Anyway, yeah, so once I had that piece on around the edge, and once I was happy with it, I created a mark here. I followed the leading edge of this detail. I created a line, I created a line, I created a line on this one. I had originally created a line also on this one, straight down, and on this one, straight down, and that's where I made my cuts. I took a look at it, I compared it with what I saw in the films, and I realized that these just simply weren't wide enough. And in fact, this one here, from what I can see in the films, these are supposed to be cut back at an angle, I think. I'd have to review them again. Maybe I'll put up a screenshot if I can. But again, at an angle. I was happy to just, once I'd made these cuts and wanted them wider, I just measured the distance that I had from here to here. I applied that width here and to here. So now I have 3 equal distant cuts. And then I took again my very small strip of styrene 03 by 04, and I glued some pieces on the inside just to create that little bit of depth in there, because those also exist in the film version. And again, I'll throw some screenshots up to show that. But yeah, so once the exterior was done, obviously I needed to start thinking about the inside. I've gone ahead and light blocked it, and I did that simply with my flashlight, and I would hold my flashlight inside and just see where the light was coming through. And it bled light pretty badly, particularly out of these areas with these grooves. All along here it was leaking light, in here it was leaking light, here obviously, here it still is, and that's only, you probably can't see it now, I'd have to be in the dark. The reason for that is because I haven't light blocked the inside yet. This dome, I think that's a sensor system. The reason I haven't done that yet is because I need to put an LED inside there. I'll get into my plan for the lighting in a moment here. Because I have, I think, let's see, 4 different lights that are going into this bridge assembly, and I'll talk about that. And I'd also like to get into, so I'm moving on next to the saucer section. I'll move the camera so I have a bit of a wider shot. My order for the electronics parts that I've chosen, it just came in within the past week, and I'd like to go through those as well and just go through some of the choices that I made and why, and how I'm going to light this model. Oh, by the way, before I forget, I used also the first of my photo etch parts here. I was uncertain at first whether it was safe to just paint over these little semicircles and how to go about creating this bottom piece. One thing that I did incorrectly, and just for your own information if you're going to plan this, when you get, so back here, this piece is the original clear that came out of the model kit. So I put that in there. And then I took the photo etch parts from the Paragraphics photo etch set, which by the way is an incredible set. It took a little while to get used to working with it, but I got there. I had to put in the airlock doors. There's a ring around the airlock doors. And then of course there's these little parts here as well. It turned out pretty nice. Looking in the films, there is definitely light coming out of here. So what I did, and I did paint over them originally, so I had to get in there with my hobby knife and just gently kind of scrape the paint away. It was, fortunately, it was a very thin layer of primer that I'd put in there. And I gently scraped that out. I light blocked the interior to the extent that only those little ovals are putting light out, although I'm still bleeding a little bit of light along these edges. I've got 2 layers of black in there right now, and it's still bleeding a little bit of light. So I'll have to get in there and fix that. Now, when you're putting this bottom strip off, so when you put the original clear plastic on, if you've raised your bridge, you're going to need to cut out a piece of styrene and affix that in here to cover that height. And when you're doing that, I would caution you to do what I didn't do, which was to cut a little notch out at the bottom, because if you can see, I'm actually covering the bottom of the airlock doors. Now that that piece is on, I don't know how to deal with that. I've taken my Dremel and just kind of played with some of the various tools that came with it to see if I can get in there and pull that away. I took my hobby knife to see if I could get in there and scrape that away. It's not realistic. I would have to pull this bottom piece off again. And right now I'm just not prepared to do that. We'll see. We'll see. It may be the case that before I affix this to the saucer section finally, I may pull this off and redo it. I don't know. I don't want to, but we'll see. Anyway, yeah, so that's the prep for the saucer section. I'm pretty pleased with it. Of course, we have the final painting. That's not part of the prep work, so I'm not going to do it for now. I'd like to move on to the prep of some of the other pieces. But this leading edge here needs to get painted, and the dome, the lower part of the dome, also needs to be painted. I haven't quite chosen the colors that I'm going to do with that yet. I've seen people using a bluish color here. I don't know if that's accurate. I did pick out some blues that I had planned to use throughout the ship. But looking back at the screenshots I've taken from the films, I don't know that blues are accurate. I'll get into that at a later point, but we'll see. So now let's talk about lighting on this piece right now, and then we'll move on to lighting for the rest of the ship. Obviously, we need a strobe here. I need lights coming out of here and here, and I need lights coming out of here. So what I've decided to do is for here, I'm going to run up a piece of fiber optic. It's 1 millimeter fiber optic, which fits just nicely inside this hole. I'll poke it out of the top just a little bit. I may leave it square coming out of that top, I don't know, or I may try to round the edge of it. I don't want to use sandpaper on it because I don't want to scuff up the paint. And also because if you use sandpaper on the fiber optic, it dulls the fiber optic a little bit, and it takes quite a bit to get that polish back. And in doing so, I'll probably end up ruining the paint. So I'm not going to do that. I'll probably just poke up the edge just slightly, like barely noticeable from this current surface. And that'll give me my strobe. What I'll do is for the strobe light, I'll have a single bulb inside the ship. And I'll use that bulb with the ends of my fiber optic glued to it. And that's going to generate my strobes all off a single bulb using fiber optics. So the cable is going to glue into here. It's going to come straight down into the saucer, and then from there I'll route it into probably into the secondary hull is where I'll place that bulb. Because I think the only other places that I need a strobe light, there's one for sure above the cargo bay doors, and one underneath the secondary hull. I don't think the nacelles have strobes, so I think there's just a 3, and that's, I don't see the need of running 3 different bulbs. I'll just run the one bulb and use fiber optic cable. For the lights coming out of the back, in what I've seen in the motion picture, so particularly in the Wrath of Khan is where I really noticed it. When you see some clear shots of the Enterprise from the rear, the lights that come out of the back are white. It's a cool white, and they're pretty bright. So what I've done is I've planned, that's why I put a bulkhead here, by the way, is I don't want that light coming off into the front. So I needed to create a separation. Right now I've left it underneath the edge that mates to the saucer section, and that'll give me some playing room to get my LED in there. This is actually a warm white, but it's a very cool variety of warm white. And that'll just sit in there, and then I'll take another piece of styrene. Once I've glued that in place, I don't know how I'm going to do that yet, maybe with silicone. Silicone, well, it's safe to use with the electronics, but I don't know if silicone is going to hold to styrene. So I'll have to do a little bit of research and find out what the best idea for that is. Now, you can see right now that I've soldered my resistor directly to the LED. I'm going to remove that, and I'll run straight wiring, and I'll put my LEDs on the circuit boards. I did that for now just because I wanted to test it, and I've got a few LEDs that I've prepared in advance. But I will end up I've decided against putting my resistors directly on my LEDs only because I've exposed my positive, and I realized I probably shouldn't do that. Here, I think it would be safe because I don't know. No, because I do have another positive running here. I'll have another positive here. So let's talk about that. The strobes coming out of the front, I have exactly 3 millimeters here. Exactly 3. Originally, I had sanded it down to 4, but I thought 4 was a little too high. It looked, pardon me, a little bit ridiculous. So I brought that down to 3. 3 was the lowest I could go because I have decided to use LED bulbs for my spots, which means I need 3 millimeters of clearance here for a 3 millimeter bulb. And I've got that. And for those bulbs, I've chosen a very cool, bright white. So that's for my floods. But from the inside here, I also want to create an ambient color that would shine through all 3 windows. But then, of course, the floodlights here would probably overpower that. But still, I wanted light coming out here and out here, but that are not spotlights. These are not supposed to be floodlights. This is just supposed to be ambient lights. So to do that, I've got a very warm warm white light, and I'm deciding to use like a neutral variety of warm white. I have 3 different varieties of warm white. I have a very warm white, I have a neutral warm white, and then I have a cool warm white, which is what I'll use in here. So I thought maybe to use a warm in here, but I may end up using a neutral. We'll see. I like to see how it looks first, and then maybe I'll go. There is a noticeable difference between the 3 varieties of white that I've chosen. And those 3 varieties do not include the very cool whites that I've selected for my floods. These are strictly, they're all warm, technically warm. They're in that range of warm white, but 3 different varieties of it. It's a warm, a neutral, and a cool. Anyway, I'm going to move my camera here real quick so I can create a wider view and have a look at the saucer section. So that's my bridge. My bridge is prepped. It's ready to go. I'm happy with it. And let's talk about the saucer section.